Hello, I'm Ford Ennals. I'm from Digital Radio UK. Welcome to another of our Newsmaker series, and I'm delighted that we're joined today by someone who always seems to be in the news relating to radio. It's Matt Deegan, who's the very well-known, distinguished digital radio commentator and guru. Now, guru being my words, not yours, Matt. Matt,
Yes.
welcome.
Hello. It's a little excessive, but we'll try and say something over the next 10 minutes or so.
Brilliant. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for finding the time. Now, obviously, Matt also, as you probably know, wears many hats. Says on LinkedIn, he's director of the Podcast Awards. He's creative director of Folder Media, and he's director of Fun Kids. And he also posts very widely and frequently about radio, digital media in the future. And indeed, I read your post today about GB News. Tell me how, and you pointed out it's not just a TV station, it's going to be a radio channel as well. How do you feel about the launch of GB News?
Yes, I'm sort of intrigued by it, which is what I say in the newsletter post. It's not a mainstream proposition. I think it's going to attract a particular audience, probably a sort of Daily Telegraph type audience who feel that normal media isn't catering for them. And I think it will probably do quite a good job of that. I don't think it's going to have huge audiences, but I don't think it particularly needs them. It's going to be in the news and in social media forever because it's culture wars. It's interested in being in the culture wars business, and if that's what they want to do, that's what they'll do. I think what's interesting is they've got quite a big multi-platform approach. So as well as a broadcast TV channel with pretty good distribution, they're seemingly going to go on Digital One next month. And I think there's always been a demand for TV news channels. For people to listen to the audio of it. I know during the American election, I listened to CNN audio kind of on the move. And I think it'd be interesting if they do it, see if anybody else follows suit, Sky News or even the BBC. I mean, BBC have 5 Live and Radio 4, but having a feed of the news channel, I think could be quite interesting as well.
I mentioned GB News and we talked about that. And I mean, it's one of what is now, I think, 56 national digital stations, hundreds of local digital stations, and maybe thousands of ultra-local stations on small-scale DAB. How do you feel about this massive expansion of all of these services? It seems great for the listener. Will they all survive? Is there a business case to support them?
I mean, we own MuxCo, so we operate some multiplexes across the country, and we've probably had our busiest year with station additions. These are kind of traditional local commercial multiplexes, so sort of larger scale multiplexes. And the people that are joining them have a mix of business models. Some are sort of donation based, and they're sort of hobby extra, where they've maybe got the DJs to do a subscription each, and it funds it that way. Some other people have got funding from local councils or government. Some are advertising funded. Some think there's a gap where large radio groups have network services, so they popped up new local services too. And yeah, they've all got a slightly different model. Not all of them will survive. And, in some ways, that's a positive thing. You've got a platform where kind of stations come and go. And, radio has been so regulated up to now. It was very difficult for new stations to launch, but be that locally or nationally, stations like Boom or GB News can suddenly pop up and be in millions of homes. And that's something which is a very new thing. But I don't think we should be worried so much about whether stations come or go. It's just great that there's an opportunity. The strongest will survive. And like any digital product, driving awareness is tough. That's hard. But some people are already connected to the community in certain ways, or they're spin-offs from other media products, or they've got strong social media connections with audiences. So there's lots of different ways to reach people.
You mentioned Fun Kids already, by pioneering, I think, the first, probably still the only child, entirely child-focused service on radio today. You're broadcasting in DAB+. And I wanted to sort of transition to talk about DAB+. So can you tell us, just for starters, what is DAB+? How does it differ from DAB? And why did you guys choose to broadcast on it?
Sure. So regular DAB has been around a long time, from the kind of mid-90s. And obviously at that time, it used a codec, a way of broadcasting that was around that time. It's called MP2. You might be aware of sort of MP3, but this was sort of MP2, works really well. Obviously all radios decode it. Sound quality is pretty good. Then more modern radios, and some countries have launched in the last sort of 5 or 6 years and have used a slightly more modern flavor of digital radio. That's called DAB+. It uses a slightly better compression called AAC. And all that really means is you can squeeze more radio stations into the same amount of space. With that, you can probably get better sound quality for smaller amount of spectrum. Now, for a radio station, what that means is that they're buying less spectrum, so it's cheaper for them to launch a DAB+ service. Downside is that not all radios can decode it. I mean, the way we look at it, pretty much all in-car radios and most radios released in the last 5 years decode DAB+. But if you've got an old Evoque that you bought in 2004 that's sitting on your kitchen, kind of splattered with cookery stains and things like that, then that might not be able to decode stuff. And in the UK, what we've seen is that the majority of established radio stations or stations that have been on digital radio for a long time are on regular DAB. And then the newer stations that are launching tend to be on DAB+. Now, the question you've got is when you launch a station, one of the things is around cost, and to get the space to broadcast in regular flavor DAB might cost me 2 to 3 times what it would cost on DAB+. So I sort of have to make that judgment of, okay, I might have a slightly smaller audience, but it will cost me less money. So is that worth it? Is that more worthwhile? And also, how much spectrum is available? On lots of the national multiplexes, there isn't much spectrum available, so your only choice is DAB+. And
would you expect, you said most of the news stations seem to be launching on DAB+. Is that a trend you expect to see continued as we go forward?
Yeah, absolutely. We are, UK digital radio is very successful. Over 60% of people have digital radios. It accounts for about the same as analog consumption. So, it's maybe even the most dominant form of listening. So in nationwide and in big cities, it's quite hard to get on DAB now because the space is running out. One way to make more from that space is to use DAB+, either fill in the gaps, or some of the newer stations have maybe changed from DAB to DAB+, and that's allowed them to squeeze in a sister service or to allow other people to launch new stations.
Now, I'm thanks for that. I'm really intrigued by the communication challenge DAB+ offers. We've done consumer research, as others have done, and people don't understand it, aren't aware of it, don't care. All they really care about is listening to the radio stations. So do we need to explain DAB+, and how should we do it as an industry?
I'm sort of slightly torn. The ideal solution is that no new radios have DAB, the old DAB in. So any radio people buy will be DAB+. And that's generally the case. I mean, what you tend to find is some sort of supermarket owned brands, and probably even that's not so much anymore. The last few years, there's been a little bit of that. And part of the reason why it's not a problem is that all of Europe and other markets have only ever been DAB+. So of course, all their radios are DAB+ radios. So it's a real sort of the end of the lines that we have to worry about. In the UK, because we've had digital radio for quite a long time, there is a bit of a challenge for people with those legacy sets, and how you talk to those people about it. I do think consumers, though, do have more of an understanding that devices need updating. And a radio hasn't often been that. You could have one that's worked for 50, 60 years and it's still fine. But I think whether it's phones or iPads or smart speakers, they sort of know that devices sort of stop or change. I think what's good here is we've got a mixed economy where the main channels are broadcasting in regular DAB. So we're not taking things away from people, but it's the new services. Obviously,
what do you tell your mates down the pub if you say, look, we're on they say, well, I can't get Fun Kids on my DAB radio, and you say, that's because it's on DAB+, and then what do you say then?
Yeah, I mean, if that some people say, oh, I get it on one of my radios, or I get it in the car and we don't get it home. You hear a little bit of that. And when you say, oh, you need to get or how old, I think your radio is probably a bit old, isn't it? You need a newer radio to get us. They generally understand that. Now, whether that's a strong enough sell to junk that old Evoque and get a new radio, it obviously varies person to person. It's like a £40 investment. It's not like, a £600 new iPad or something like that. I think the tick mark's important. I think it's important that in messaging, we make reference to that, and listen to these new stations on your tick mark enabled radio, and just this idea that if it's not working for you, it's probably, we're kind of saying it's your fault. And you've got a kind of older device.
And as a final comment, I don't know whether you want to give a plug to any of your new initiatives. I mean, I mentioned right at the top that you wear many hats, you're involved in lots of projects. I think most recently, I can think of the podcast awards, which have been, I think, an amazing success. Is there anything else coming along that you wanted to share with us?
So British Podcast Awards is busy. We've got a ceremony on the 10th of July at Brockwell Park. So we're kind of creating a mini festival.
So is that live or virtual? Is that virtual or is that?
It's all live in person, and it's outdoor. So it's in what seems like the world's biggest tent, and we're kind of building a sort of festival stage. Tickets may still be available depending on when you're hearing this at BritishPodcastAwards.com. But I think what we've seen in the podcast sector, so we had 1,600 entries this year for the awards. Huge growth from commercial operators as well as independents, and people want to create great audio, and there's more opportunities to hear audio, and that's similar to this launch of new stations as well. We're very much in a golden age of audio. It's never been so good for audio creators and for listeners. And whether that's live or on demand, or other types of services, I think that's kind of great news for consumers, and is up to content creators to keep doing better jobs. That's the other bit. All that competition should make all these audio things even better.
Yeah, brilliant. Matt, thank you so much for spending time today. We wish you well with the podcast and everything you're involved in. So take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.